Another miserable cycle at the Galactic Defense Academy. Wonderful. Just wonderful. My name is Commander Vazix of the Ortrelian Defense Force, and I've been cursed with the most thankless job in the galaxy, training the next generation of supposedly elite cadets. 27 standard cycles I've been at this forsaken academy, watching species from across the known universe fumble through basic combat scenarios with all the grace of a Plovian slug in a salt mine. Commander Vazix. A word, if you please. I swiveled my optical stalks toward the approaching figure of Academy Overseer Mack, his 6 spindly limbs clicking against the polished floor of the corridor. His facial ridges were flared in that irritating expression of superiority that made me want to accidentally discharge my sidearm in his general direction. Overseer, I acknowledged with the minimum required deference. How may I be of service on this absolutely delightful morning? The annual combat simulations begin today, he chittered, completely missing my sarcasm. Typical Centauri brilliant tactical minds, humor of a space rock. Really? I had no idea. It's not like I've been preparing for 3 weeks straight or anything. Mack's secondary breathing sacs inflated slightly. Your human cadet is scheduled for the Omega-7 simulation this afternoon. Ah, yes, the human. Cadet Mackenzie Rivera, or Mack as she insisted on being called, much to the confusion of our more formal species. Humans and their bizarre need for nicknames. She'd been in my advanced tactical course for nearly a full term now, sitting quietly in the back, turning in perfectly adequate work, and generally being so unremarkable I sometimes forgot she was there. I'm aware of the schedule, Overseer. Is there a problem? Mack's mandibles twitched in what passed for amusement among his kind. No problem. Simply an opportunity. Several of the instruction staff have placed wagers on the performance metrics of various species. Let me guess. Nobody's betting on the human. On the contrary, we're all betting against the human. I felt my dorsal spine stiffen. Explain. Well? Mack lowered his voice conspiratorially. Instructor Kazril has put forth the theory that humans are. How did he phrase it? Evolutionary dead ends that succeeded through dumb luck rather than any actual merit. The general consensus is that your Rivera will fail spectacularly in any scenario requiring actual combat prowess. Now let's be clear. I have no particular fondness for humans. They're messy, emotional, and have an inexplicable attachment to keeping domesticated predators in their living quarters. But they're my species to criticize, not Kazril's with his perfect exoskeleton and annoying habit of molting during faculty meetings. I see, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. And what are the terms of this wager? 1 month's salary, Mack replied. But that's not all. We thought it would be more entertaining if we increased the difficulty parameters of Rivera's simulation. By how much? I asked, my curiosity genuinely piqued. A maximum level. Triple the enemy count, half the available resources, and we've removed all the standard exploit opportunities that cadets usually discover. I should have been outraged. I should have reported this blatant violation of Academy protocols immediately. Instead, I found myself calculating the odds. Rivera was different from other humans I'd trained. Quieter, more observant. There was something in those brown eyes that suggested wheels turning beneath the surface. I accept your wager, I said finally. But I want double the pot when Rivera succeeds. Mack's facial ridges flattened in surprise, then rippled with amusement. Bold of you, Commander. Very bold. We'll see you at Simulation Chamber 12 at 4th chime. As he scuttled away, I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my career. But something told me that underestimating Cadet Rivera might just be the biggest mistake of theirs. Humans, after all, had a peculiar tendency to surprise you just when you thought you had them figured out. Simulation Chamber 12 was the crown jewel of the Academy's training facilities. A massive hexagonal room with walls constructed of quantum-responsive neopolymer that could transform into literally any environment, was from the methane lakes of Titan to the crystal forests of Aldebaran Prime. The floor contained pressure-sensitive panels that could simulate any terrain, and the atmospheric controls could reproduce everything from the vacuum of space to the crushing pressure of a gas giant's lower atmosphere. In short, it was the perfect place to humiliate a human. I arrived early to inspect the setup, my padded feet making no sound as I crossed the observation deck. The technicians, a pair of Voltraxian twins with their characteristic blue-tinged scales, were hunched over the control console. "Status report," I barked, causing both of them to jump simultaneously. "Always entertaining." "Commander Vazix." The one on the left, Tekka or Toka, I could never tell them apart, swiveled her eye stalks toward me. "We've just finished the final calibrations for the Omega-7 simulation." "With modifications," added the other twin with a nervous twitch of her tail. "Show me," I demanded, leaning over their shoulders to examine the holographic display. What I saw made my digestive tract constrict. The standard Omega-7 simulation was challenging enough a hostage extraction on a hostile moon base with moderate resistance. But this was sadistic. 37 enemy combatants? The standard is 12. I growled. "Overseer Jilnpak's instructions," replied maybe Tekka with a shrug of her narrow shoulders. "And what's this? Environmental hazards including random radiation bursts and oxygen depletion. Are you trying to fail my cadet or kill her?" "The safeties are still in place," maybe Toka assured me. "Technically." I continued scrolling through the parameters, my agitation growing. Half ammunition, no med kits, enemies with thermal vision in a scenario designed for a species that radiates heat like a malfunctioning fusion reactor. Perfect. The observation deck door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and in strolled the betting pool, led by Kiaz Rill with his gleaming exoskeleton polished to an ostentatious shine. "Commander Vazix, so glad you could join us for this educational experience," he clicked, his mandibles quivering with poorly concealed excitement. Behind him crowded various instructors and higher-ranking cadets who had somehow caught wind of the spectacle. I recognized cadets from the Draconian Collective, their scaled faces impassive but eyes gleaming with anticipation. A group of Medusan cadets hovered near the back, their tentacled heads pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that clearly communicated amusement. "We've set up additional recording devices inside the chamber," announced Overseer Jilnpak, tapping a control pad. A dozen small hovering camera drones appeared on the display, for educational purposes. "Of course," I replied dryly. "Nothing to do with sharing the humans' failure across the Academy communication network." "We would never," K's Rill protested, but the clicking of his secondary mandibles, the Centauri equivalent of barely suppressed laughter, gave him away. The door to the simulation chamber below opened, and in walked Cadet Rivera. For such a supposedly formidable species, humans were remarkably unimpressive physically. No claws, no enhanced senses, no natural armor. Just soft pink skin, dull teeth, and limbs that could snap with minimal pressure. Rivera stood a modest 170 centimeters tall, with her dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, another bizarre naming convention, as they don't have tails. What struck me immediately was her demeanor. Most cadets approached the Omega-7 simulation with appropriate trepidation. Rivera looked like she was going for a pleasant stroll in a recreation garden. She casually surveyed the chamber, hands clasped behind her back, rocking slightly on her heels. "Is she actually humming?" asked one of the Medusan cadets, their translator struggling to convey their incredulity. She was, in fact, humming, some human melody that made no mathematical sense. "Your cadet appears to be malfunctioning," Kazrill observed with vicious delight. "Perhaps she doesn't understand the severity of the simulation." "Oh, I think she understands perfectly," I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. The thing about humans that most species failed to grasp was their contradictory nature. On one hand, they were emotional, impulsive, and physically fragile. On the other hand, they had survived on a death world, fighting everything from microscopic pathogens to massive predators, all while their planet tried to kill them with weather. They were adaptable in ways that defied conventional evolutionary logic. And sometimes, when a human appeared too calm in a situation that warranted fear, it meant one of two things. Either they were too stupid to recognize the danger, or they already had a plan. Looking at Rivera's face now set in an expression of mild interest as she examined the simulation chamber's features, I desperately hoped it was the latter. "The simulation begins in 30 seconds, announced the automated system. "Cadet Rivera, confirm readiness." Rivera straightened, gave a crisp salute to the observation window, and spoke clearly. "Cadet Mackenzie Rivera, ready for simulation Omega-7. 20 credits says she cries when it's over," whispered one of the draconian cadets. 50 says she doesn't last 60 seconds, countered a Medusan. As the countdown began, I found myself gripping the console edge with all four hands. This was either going to be the most embarrassing moment of Rivera's academy career, or well, I wasn't exactly sure what the alternative was. But I was surprisingly eager to find out. Simulation Omega-7, hostage extraction. Objective: rescue the ambassador from the moon base. 37 hostile combatants detected. Atmospheric instability warning. Radiation warning. Equipment limited. Simulation commencing in 3, 2, 1. The sterile white chamber shimmered and transformed into the harsh, rocky landscape of Proxima Centauri's third moon. The holographic projection was flawless. You could almost taste the sulfur in the simulated atmosphere. Rivera stood on a ridge overlooking the moon base, which glowed an ominous red in the perpetual dusk. "Is that all the equipment she gets?" asked a Trilaxian cadet, their four eyes blinking in asynchronous patterns. "That's barely enough to handle 5 enemies, let alone 37. Rivera knelt down to examine her pathetic arsenal: 1 standard-issue blaster with half-charge, 3 smoke grenades, a communications jammer with limited range, and a basic medical patch that wouldn't even close a moderate wound. No tactical scanner, no shield generator, no backup weapon. "This is just cruel," I muttered, though part of me was curious to see how the human would respond to such overwhelming odds. "Activating additional parameters," announced Mack with undisguised glee, his claws dancing across the control panel. "Random radiation bursts enabled. Oxygen fluctuation enabled. Enemy thermal vision enabled." On the screen, Rivera checked her equipment one more time, then did something bizarre. She sat down cross-legged on the ridge and closed her eyes. "Is she meditating?" asked one of the Voltraxian twins incredulously. "Perhaps she's praying to one of their primitive deities," suggested Ki-Az-Ril with a dismissive flick of his antenna. "Humans often revert to superstition when faced with certain failure." But I had seen this before in human military tactics. They called it centering, a moment of focused calm before action. Still, this seemed like an excessive amount of centering given the urgency of the situation. The timer was already ticking down. 30 credits says she gets shot within the first minute, called out one of the draconian cadets. 40 says she accidentally shoots herself, countered a Medusan. 100 says she does something that none of you are expecting, I said quietly, my eyes fixed on the screen. Rivera's eyes snapped open. But instead of moving toward the base, or finding cover, or doing literally anything that the tactical manual would suggest, she turned and walked directly to the wall of the simulation chamber. "What is she doing?" Mack demanded. "The objective is in the opposite direction." Rivera's hand ran along the seemingly solid rock face of the simulated moon landscape, her fingers tracing patterns that made no sense. The cadets in the observation deck erupted in laughter. "She's malfunctioning," hooted a Trilaxian. "The human has completely lost her mind." But I wasn't laughing, because I noticed something that the others had missed in their rush to ridicule. Rivera wasn't moving randomly. Her eyes were narrowed in concentration, and her fingers were following a specific path along the wall. She was looking for something. Simulation time, 45 seconds, announced the automated system. No progress toward objective detected. Rivera stopped suddenly, her head tilting to one side. A small smile crept across her face. Then she did something that made the entire observation deck fall silent in confusion. She knocked on the simulation wall, 3 sharp raps with her knuckles. And then she spoke, not to any character within the simulation, but directly to the wall itself. System access request, maintenance protocol override, Article 7 billion of the simulation safety guidelines. Every alien in the observation deck turned to look at me in stunned silence. I felt my dorsal spines flatten against my back in dawning realization. "Oh, you clever little primate," I whispered. For exactly 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The observation deck remained frozen in confusion. Then the simulated landscape flickered just once, barely perceptible. "What in the name of the 7 moons was that?" demanded Pak, his voice rising to a pitch I'd never heard from a Centauri before. On the screen, a small section of the rock wall shimmered and revealed what it truly was, a maintenance access panel. The kind installed in all simulation chambers for emergency repairs and system updates. The kind specifically designed to blend perfectly with any simulated environment. The kind absolutely no cadet was supposed to know about. "That's impossible," screeched one of the Voltraxian twins. "Those panels are programmed to be undetectable during active simulations." "Apparently not to humans," I replied, unable to keep a note of pride from my voice. Rivera's fingers danced across the panel with practiced precision. The small smile on her face had blossomed into a full-blown grin that humans typically displayed when experiencing satisfaction. "Stop her," Rill demanded, his exoskeleton clicking loudly as he agitated. "This is clearly outside protocol." "On what grounds?" I asked innocently. "There's no rule stating that cadets can't access maintenance panels during simulations." "Because no one's ever found one before," he sputtered. "Then perhaps your programming isn't as flawless as you believed," I suggested, enjoying his discomfort far more than was professionally appropriate. On the screen, Rivera had pulled up what appeared to be the system's base code. My primary heart nearly stopped. She wasn't just accessing the maintenance menu, she was diving into the actual programming architecture of the simulation. "Is she hacking our system?" asked the draconian cadet, his scales paling to a lighter shade of green. "Not hacking," I corrected automatically. "She's utilizing an existing access point to modify simulation parameters." "There's a difference." "How does she even understand the code language?" he demanded Pak. "That's advanced Centauri programming." I chuckled. "You think humans don't study your programming languages? They collect languages like the Medusan collect shiny objects. It's a compulsion for them." Rivera's fingers paused for a moment as she squinted at something on the screen. She muttered something that the audio didn't quite pick up, then resumed typing with renewed vigor. "Simulation time, 1 minute, 15 seconds, announced the automated system, and sounding oddly unconcerned about the fact that a cadet was currently rewriting its operational parameters. "Override access granted," announced a different voice, the base system AI. "Administrator privileges activated." "Administrator privileges?" Rill's mandibles clacked so violently I feared he might chip one. "That's not possible. Those require overseer-level authorization codes." All eyes turned to Pak, who had gone unnaturally still. "I may have forgotten to update the maintenance panel security protocols after the last system upgrade," he admitted reluctantly. "You forgot?" Rill's exoskeleton was now vibrating at a frequency that threatened to shake pieces off. "It was on my to-do list," Pak protested weakly. Meanwhile, Rivera had moved from typing to swiping through what appeared to be menu options. With each swipe, something in the simulation changed. The red warning lights indicating radiation turned green. The atmospheric instability warnings disappeared. And then, most dramatically, all 37 enemy combatants simultaneously froze in place, their weapons lowering to point at the ground. "What is happening?" whispered one of the Medusan cadets, their tentacles writhing in agitation. "She's rewriting the scenario parameters," I explained, no longer bothering to hide my amusement. "She's essentially telling the simulation that all hostiles are now in a neutral state." "But that's cheating," protested a Trilaxian. "Is it?" I asked. "The objective is to extract the hostage without being killed. The parameters don't specify how that must be achieved." Rivera closed the system menu with a final tap and turned back to face the now frozen landscape. With purposeful strides, she walked directly toward the moon base. The doors slid open automatically. As she approached, she'd reset their access protocols too. The observation deck watched in stunned silence as Rivera strolled through the base, past motionless guards who didn't even track her with their eyes. She reached the central holding cell in under 30 seconds, tapped a code into the door panel that caused it to slide open immediately, and approached the simulated ambassador. "Ambassador Trexhal?" she said clearly. "I'm Cadet Rivera from the Galactic Defense Academy. I'm here to escort you to safety." The holographic ambassador, a portly Centauri diplomat in ceremonial robes, looked around in confusion at the frozen guards. What happened to my captors?" he asked. Rivera's face was the picture of professional innocence. "They experienced a slight system malfunction, sir. If you'll follow me, we have an extraction shuttle waiting." She led the bewildered ambassador back through the base and out toward the extraction point. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single alarm was triggered. The hostile moon base might as well have been a luxury resort for all the resistance it offered. As they reached the designated extraction coordinates, Rivera tapped her communicator. "Mission complete. 2 for extraction. Simulation complete," announced the system. "Objective achieved. Final time, 1 minute and 48 seconds. The observation deck erupted into chaos. "This doesn't count." Kiaz-Ril was practically foaming at his mandibles. She circumvented the entire challenge. "She found a solution to an impossible scenario," I countered, "one that guaranteed 0 casualties on both sides. I'd call that exemplary tactical thinking." "It's not tactical thinking, it's system manipulation." "And you don't think real enemies try to manipulate systems?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "When did combat become solely about who has the biggest gun?" The draconian cadets were muttering among themselves, their earlier mockery replaced with something that sounded suspiciously like respect. The Medusans had gone completely still, their tentacles frozen in the pattern that indicated deep thought. Jilnpak seemed torn between outrage and fascination. "The simulation was supposed to be unbeatable at those parameters," he said quietly. "We designed it that way specifically." "And yet a human with minimal combat training just beat it in under 2 minutes without firing a single shot," I pointed out. "Perhaps that says more about your design assumptions than about her methods." On the screen, the simulation faded away, revealing Rivera standing alone in the center of the chamber. She looked directly up at the observation window, smiled, and offered a small, respectful bow. "I believe," I said, extending all 4 hands toward my colleagues, "that you all owe me a considerable sum of credits." The observation deck remained in stunned silence for a full 17 seconds after the simulation ended. I counted. 17 seconds of absolute, pristine speechlessness from a room full of beings who normally couldn't shut up about their superior tactical knowledge if their lives depended on it. Worth every credit I was about to collect. Kiaz-Ril was the first to recover, his mandibles clicking furiously as he struggled to form words. This is completely unprecedented. It must be disqualified immediately." "On what grounds?" I asked, leaning back in my seat and stretching my dorsal spines in a deliberate show of relaxation. Cadet Rivera completed the objective within the parameters of the simulation by bypassing the entire challenge. Kazril's exoskeleton was now vibrating at a frequency that threatened to liquefy his internal organs. Amusing, but probably not healthy. The challenge, I reminded him, was to extract the hostage without being killed. At no point in the briefing does it state that the cadet must engage in combat. It's implied, sputtered Pack. Ah, so now we're teaching our cadets to make assumptions about mission parameters? I asked, enjoying myself immensely. Fascinating pedagogical approach. Please tell me more about how making dangerous assumptions during combat scenarios is the cornerstone of good military training. The door to the observation deck slid open, and in walked Cadet Rivera herself, looking remarkably composed for someone who had just upended the entire combat simulation paradigm. The room fell silent again as every alien eye, optical stalk, sensory tentacle, and visual receptor turned toward her. "Permission to enter, Commander?" she asked, standing at perfect attention. "Granted, Cadet," I replied. "I believe these instructors have some questions about your unique approach to the Omega-7 simulation." Rivera stepped into the room, her face a mask of professional neutrality that didn't quite hide the sparkle of mischief in her eyes. "You." Kazril pointed a trembling claw at her. "Explain yourself." Rivera raised an eyebrow, a uniquely human expression that somehow conveyed both respect and insubordination simultaneously. "I completed the mission objective, Instructor Kazril," she replied calmly. "The ambassador was extracted safely with 0 casualties on either side. By hacking the system. By utilizing available resources," she corrected. "The maintenance panel was part of the environment. I simply recognized it and determined it was the most efficient tool for resolving the scenario." One of the draconian cadets had pushed to the front of the crowd, his scales flushed with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "How did you even know the panel was there?" "It's designed to be invisible during active simulations." Rivera shrugged, another human gesture that managed to be both casual and precisely calculated. "I spent some time as a student assistant in the maintenance division last semester. Part of my job was updating the simulation chamber subsystems. I noticed that regardless of the projection overlay, the physical architecture of the room remains constant. The maintenance panels are always located at junction points in the wall structure." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered aliens. Several of the cadets were looking at Rivera with new expressions, not mockery or disdain, but something approaching respect. "That still doesn't explain how you accessed administrator privileges," Pack insisted, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. Rivera's expression remained professionally neutral. "The default override codes haven't been updated since the Academy changed system providers 3 years ago. It's noted in Maintenance Bulletin 47B, which recommended immediate security protocol updates." She paused delicately. "I assumed, since the codes still worked, that this was an intentional part of the simulation, a test to see if cadets could identify non-combat solutions." Pack's breathing sacs deflated in embarrassment. "I made a mental note to request access to Maintenance Bulletin 47B at my earliest convenience." "This is outrageous." Kazril had moved from outrage to indignation, which for a Centauri was like moving from boiling to merely scalding. "Humans don't fight fair." At this, Rivera finally allowed herself a small smile. "With all due respect, Instructor Kazril, fighting fair gets you killed. On Earth we have a saying, if you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck." Several of the Medusan cadets' tentacles rippled in what I recognized as their equivalent of laughter. Even some of the draconians were making the low rumbling sounds that indicated amusement. "The point of these simulations," Rivera continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "isn't to demonstrate who can shoot the most enemies with perfect form. It's to achieve objectives with minimal casualties and maximum efficiency. if that means reprogramming enemy systems rather than engaging in direct combat. That's not cheating, that's optimal strategy. The observation deck door slid open again, and the room fell instantly silent as Grand Director Vazix entered. 8 feet of imposing Arcturian authority, with the ceremonial sash of the Academy Council draped across his massive shoulders. Even I straightened my posture automatically. Director, we all acknowledged in unison. Vazix surveyed the room with his 4 primary eyes, while his secondary eyes remained fixed on Rivera. I was informed of an unusual simulation result and came to investigate personally. Would someone care to explain why a supposedly impossible scenario was completed in under 2 minutes? Before K.S.R.I.L. could launch into what would undoubtedly be a wildly biased account, I stepped forward. Cadet Rivera identified a systemic vulnerability in the simulation parameters and utilized it to complete the mission objective without engaging in unnecessary combat. Director. I see. The director's voice revealed nothing of his thoughts. And this systemic vulnerability was? An unsecured maintenance access panel, sir, Rivera replied, combined with outdated system override codes that granted administrative privileges. The director was silent for a long moment, his secondary eyes blinking in the rapid pattern that indicated intense thought. Finally, he spoke. Instructor Jilnpak, see that those security protocols are updated immediately. His tone made it clear this was not a request. Yes, Director, Jilnpak replied, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Vazix turned his attention fully to Rivera. Cadet, your approach was unconventional. Yes, sir, she acknowledged. In a real combat situation, such system vulnerabilities might not exist. With respect, Director, Rivera replied, in my studies of galactic conflicts over the past 3 centuries, approximately 67% of successful military operations involved some form of system manipulation, code breaking, or technological override rather than direct force engagement. Even species with overwhelming firepower advantages often opt for systemic solutions when available. The director's secondary eyes blinked rapidly again. You've studied our military history extensively. Yes, sir. Humans have a particular interest in how conflicts are resolved across species. We find the patterns educational. A low murmur spread through the observation deck. The idea that humans, those emotional, impulsive creatures, had been systematically studying how every other species fought wars was clearly a disturbing revelation to many present. The director was silent for another long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he made the low, rumbling sound that Arcturians used to indicate approval. Your solution, while unexpected, demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive thinking the Academy was founded to nurture, he announced. The simulation result stands. Cadet Rivera passes with exemplary marks. The collective intake of breath from the various respiratory organs in the room was audible. Furthermore, the director continued, I am ordering a review of all simulation parameters. Perhaps we have become too predictable in our training methodologies. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Instructor Q.S.R.I.L.? I believe you owe Commander Vazix a substantial sum. I suggest you pay promptly. Humans aren't the only species who can find creative solutions to outstanding debts. As the director departed, I couldn't help but notice the expressions on the faces of the alien cadets who had been so quick to dismiss Rivera earlier. Some looked shocked, some looked impressed, and some, the smarter ones, looked worried. They were right to be worried, because now they all understood what I had suspected for some time. Humans didn't play the game, they changed it. 3 days later, I found myself in the instructor's lounge, enjoying a well-deserved cup of Jovian tea and the lingering satisfaction of having my account balance increased by my colleagues' combined monthly salaries. The pleasant weight of vindication is so much more satisfying than being right alone. The door slid open, and Overseer Jilnpak entered, looking significantly more humbled than when I'd last seen him. His exoskeleton had lost some of its shine, and his facial ridges were flattened in the Centauri expression of resigned acceptance. "Commander Vazix," he acknowledged, pouring himself a steaming cup of nutrient solution. "I've been meaning to speak with you about the rather substantial transfer of credits to my account. No need to thank me for the opportunity to contribute to my retirement fund." Jilnpak's mandibles twitched irritably. "About your human student. The maintenance panels have all been secured, and the system codes updated with triple encryption protocols." He sounded inordinately proud of this achievement. "The Rivera method has been officially classified as a prohibited simulation strategy." I couldn't help but laugh, a rasping sound that made Jilnpak's antennae flatten against his head. "You really don't understand humans at all, do you?" "I understand they're unpredictable and don't follow proper combat protocols," he replied stiffly. "That's like saying plasma is a bit warm. The fundamental error you and the others make is assuming that humans approach problems the same way we do." I took a leisurely sip of my tea. "The Academy teaches cadets to follow protocols, master established tactics, and perfect techniques that have been used for generations. It works well enough for most species. But not humans," Jilnpak said, his voice tinged with reluctant curiosity. "Humans don't just think outside the box, Overseer. They don't even acknowledge the box exists until they've already broken out of it. While we're teaching our cadets to be better at playing the game, humans are busy changing the rules." Down the corridor, we could hear a commotion. A group of cadets from various species were clustered around someone, asking questions with unusual intensity. As they passed the lounge doorway, I caught a glimpse of Cadet Rivera at the center of the group, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the attention. "She's become something of a legend," Jilnpak observed. "Half the cadets want to learn her methods, and the other half want to prove they can do better." Both reasonable responses to being shown that everything you thought you knew about tactical training is incomplete, I replied. The Overseer's breathing sacs expanded slightly in what might have been a sigh. Director Vazrian has ordered a complete overhaul of the simulation protocols. He's even suggested bringing in human consultants to identify other potential creative solutions. I nearly choked on my tea. Human consultants? The Academy hasn't brought in outside species consultants in over 300 cycles. Times change, Jilnpak said simply. And apparently we've been operating under some dangerously outdated assumptions. As we sat in contemplative silence, my datapad buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Rivera. "Commander Vazix, just a heads up that the new triple encryption has a quantum resonance vulnerability when processing multiple simultaneous authentication requests." Don't tell Jilnpak. But I think the Medusan cadets already found it. Thought you might want to know before tomorrow's advanced simulation class. Rivera. I carefully kept my expression neutral as I closed the message, but couldn't quite suppress the twitch of amusement in my dorsal spines. "Something important?" Jilnpak inquired. "Just a reminder that no matter how high you build your walls, someone will always find a way over, under, or through?" "That sounds like a human saying," he observed suspiciously. "It is now," I replied, finishing my tea. "Here's another one for your collection. Never challenge a human to beat a system unless you're prepared for them to break it instead." As I left the lounge, I found myself thinking about the upcoming term with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Things were about to get very interesting at the Galactic Defense Academy. Humans. They'll either be the salvation of the galaxy or its ultimate disruption. Either way, I'm just glad I'm around to watch the show and collect the betting pool.